Hi, I am Jean Ogden and I am from Spartanburg. And my story tonight that I would like to share with you is entitled Me and the Sundance Kid. Robert Redford is a senior citizen. I repeat, Robert Redford is a senior citizen. I've never seen his birth certificate, haven't seen him at Publix on Senior Day, and I haven't seen him at Shoney's at an early bird special. But I recently saw a picture of him. There was no soft lighting, and there was no makeup or anything, and ew. He looked older than dirt. He looked as old as Willie Nelson. But Robert and I go back a long way. I think it must have all kind of started about the 8th time that I saw The Way We Were, the movie. That white military uniform, that blonde hair that kind of fell down over his forehead. That drafted me forever into the Robert Redford army of admirers. And you know, I have been lucky enough, I have 2 real-life encounters with Robert Redford. The first was a wave, and the second, several years later, I shook his hand. That wave was simply momentous. I was living in Las Vegas at Nellis Air Force Base with my Air Force husband, and I had a very good friend who also loved Robert Redford, and she worked at one of the downtown hotels on the Strip. She was in the business office, and she had found out that Robert Redford was coming to the hotel where she worked, and he was going to speak to a national convention of foresters. It was a forestry convention. Well, she asked her boss if he could possibly get us into the back of the auditorium so that we could see Robert Redford and hear him speak. And so he did that, and I wore my green pantsuit thinking that would help me kind of blend in with the foresters. And let me tell you, Robert's speech was magnificent. He talked about ecology and the environment and other really weighty things. And believe you me, he was not just a pretty face. He came across very, very smart and very intelligent. At the end of the speech, before they were whisking him off to a press conference, they asked if there were any questions from anybody in the audience. Those stodgy foresters, they just sat on their hands and they didn't ask anything. And of course, I was dying to ask him some questions, and my friend had her hand on my arm because she knew if I raised my hand, we would immediately be kicked out of there. But one forester finally got up and said, "Mr. Redford, what's your favorite tree?" Whereas I had wonderful questions. I had fantastic questions that I could have asked him. I would have said, "Mr. Redford, I hear you're interested in politics. Is that true? Would you ever be interested in running for President of the United States? Could I be your campaign manager? Is it true that you and your wife are separated? And how do you feel about slightly older women?" Well, I didn't get to ask my questions, but my friend's boss was so nice, and he saw that we were having such a good time. He said, "I'm going to let you go down to the secret passage where he was going to leave." It was where they let the dignitaries way down in the bowels of the hotel. It was a long, glassed-in hall. And so he said, "Now you two can stand on the outside of that glass and wait for him after the press conference as he goes. You can see him as he goes by." So we went down there, and the glass was really thick. It must have been proof or something, because that's where the dignitaries would leave from. So we had to press our noses right up against the glass, and we waited, and finally, here comes Robert sauntering down the hall, and he had his entourage with him. And we were the only people on the outside of that glassed-in hall, and he glanced over at us and smiled. And she and I gave our sexiest smiles back. And we both waved, and he waved at us. So that was my first encounter with Robert Redford. Well, fast forward a few years, and we were transferred to San Antonio, Texas. And we were living there, and I'm a big reader. A wonderful book came out. It was entitled Hondo, My Father, and it was a biography about the late Hondo Crouch. He was an infamous Texan. He died a sad death. He was an alcoholic, Steve. You know. I didn't mean to put that in. But anyway, the book was fantastic, and I decided that it would make a wonderful movie for Robert Redford to appear in and or to produce. And so I bought another book, $24.95, and I bought this hardcover book, and I wrote a letter to Robert Redford to enclose with the book. And I said, Robert, this would make a wonderful movie for you to star in and produce, and I would be glad to co-star with you. Or any bit part would be fine, actually, you know. And so I actually pasted my picture in the front inside cover of his book, and I mailed the letter and the book to Robert Redford at his ranch in Utah. Well, months went by, and nothing, and I thought, oh well, here's another one of my schemes that's going down the drain. And it was a hot summer day, and I was going through my mail, and I was drinking a Diet Coke and eating Cheetos, and I came across a letter, and it was postmarked New York City. And I thought, oh, well, some fabulous Reader's Digest subscription, blah, 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 or something, you know. Well, what it was a letter from Robert Redford, signed in ink. I did like this to make sure that the ink smeared and it was real. And, of course, I got a little Cheeto smudge on the letter, too. But the letter was just wonderful. He thanked me for sending him the book, and he said he really enjoyed reading it. He agreed that it would make a wonderful movie, but he just was too booked into the future to even consider my proposal. And he did not return the book. But that means that I reside in his library somewhere in that book, wherever it would be. But I have that letter now framed, and it's framed in my guest room. And every time I walk by it, I can read between the lines. And between the lines, I can see what Robert says. He says, Jean, I'm really sorry that we haven't met again since Las Vegas. And he says, I hope your nose has recovered. And he said, yes, my wife and I have divorced. And maybe someday, somewhere, somehow, we'll meet again. Well, we did meet again. Still living in San Antonio, and my husband and I noticed in the newspaper that Robert Redford was coming to Austin, Texas, which is about 70 miles north of San Antonio, and he was to appear at a movie premiere, and it was a benefit for the his Sundance Foundation. My sweet husband paid too much money for 3 tickets to this benefit. My teenage daughter, our daughter, wanted to go to see what all the fuss was about Robert Redford. But so the 3 of us went up there. The movie was just okay, and the banquet was at a nearby hotel afterwards. And Robert looked a little tired and dismayed even then, and didn't. He gave a very short little talk, and it really wasn't really that super duper. But afterwards, they said, now, if anybody would like to shake hands with Mr. Redford and meet him, stand in this line over here. So we did that. My husband did with me, because he had his camera, and he was going to take my picture when I got up to him to shake his hand. We stood there, and that was some of the tackiest people in that line that you have ever seen. They were unruly, they were silly, they were rude. They didn't know Robert like I knew Robert. But anyway, I finally got up to see Robert Redford. And I guess I must have been a little bit nervous, because in just one breath I said, Mr. Redford, I'm the one who sent you the book, Hondo, My Father, about Hondo Crouch, who lived in Texas, and to tell you that I thought it would make a really, really good movie for you to star in, you know. And he just looked at me kind of quizzically, and it's kind of a half smile. And his manager, who was standing next to him, said, next. Well, that was my second underwhelming, less than satisfying meeting with Robert Redford. And you know, after these years now, it's been a harsh reality, but I have finally come to a conclusion, and I've learned a very, very important lesson, and I want to share that with the ladies here. If you decide that you want an idol who's a handsome hunk, hero type person, just be sure that you pick out someone and pick out that an idol who is much, much younger than you. Because then you will never grow up, or you'll never live long enough to see him grow up to be a senior citizen. So, farewell, Robert Redford. Hello, Ryan Reynolds.